Today, I'm taking you on the inaugural European sleeper from Berlin to Paris. It's a journey I have been looking forward to. A private sleeper, a full night on board with one of Europe's most interesting newcomers. But the day before departure, something changed. What I had booked and what I was about to get were no longer the same. So this is not just a video about a trip, it's also about customer service and how handling an incident can be the difference between a good experience and a terrible one. Come along! Hi and welcome to Berlin Hauptbahnhof, a very large station inaugurated in 2006 and one of the symbols of the reunification of this beautiful city. But today, we're not here for the station. We're here for European Sleeper, one of Europe's newest night train operators and a company that, in many ways, represents the return of overnight rail travel across the continent. It's an ambitious project with an interesting business model centered on using older but still very capable rolling stock, offering night train journeys at reasonable fares. Overall, their activity is quite frankly commendable. European Sleeper started operations in May 2023 with a night train linking Berlin and Brussels via Amsterdam. Less than a year later, in March 2024, the service was extended to Prague, creating a much longer and more ambitious route across Central Europe. And now, in March 2026, they are launching this new connection between Berlin and Paris via Brussels, which will also serve Hamburg starting in July. Looking ahead, the company plans to expand even further, with a Brussels to Milan via Zurich service expected in September 2026, and potential future routes such as Brussels to Barcelona in the coming years. And tonight's journey, the first train from Berlin to Paris, is part of that story. Although, at this very moment, I am still not entirely sure what kind of accommodation I'll actually have on this trip to Brussels. In the meantime, 10 minutes before departure, the European sleeper has yet to arrive. And it's still nowhere to be seen 10 minutes after the scheduled departure time. Eventually, it does make its way into Berlin Hauptbahnhof, hauled by an Alstom Trucks MS3 with a consist of couchettes and a single sleeping car operated by Train Charter on behalf of European Sleeper. It's time to board. And shortly afterwards, the train departs Berlin under a beautiful sunset. And as usual upon departure, today's trip map. Already moving, I head to the seat indicated on my original ticket, only to find someone else's belongings already there. Puzzling, right? I'll come back to that a little later. In the meantime, with the journey underway, I'm escorted to my actual compartment and find an empty sleeper for the night. So, at last, I discover what kind of accommodation I'll be having on this journey. Soon after, we arrive in Stendal, a little over 100 kilometers into the trip, where we make a brief stop. This is a town with over 1,000 years of history, today home to the Fire Brigade Museum, which traces the evolution of firefighting from leather buckets to modern fire engines, and to the Magdeburg Stendal University of Applied Sciences. Back on board, let me give you a tour of the compartment still in its day configuration. The window opens, and just below it there's a table with complimentary water, the onboard menu, the house rules, and even a welcome drink. There's also some artwork, and a small vanity with towels and soap provided, although the tap offers little more than a trickle. Each seat has its own individual reading light, and there's a wardrobe that stores the bedding, along with the ladder used to access the upper berths. As for storage, there's space above, as well as room underneath the seats. There are also two power sockets in the compartment, one next to the single seat, and another inside the vanity. Overall, this is not at all a bad way to spend the night on the rails. Time now to step out of the compartment and take a walk through the train from head to tail while I explain why, up until after departure, I didn't actually know what kind of accommodation I would end up having on this journey. Let's go back to the beginning. On December 16, 2025, I booked the single sleeper compartment, car 36, place 41. Everything was confirmed and all seemed perfectly straightforward. Then, on March 15th, I received an email informing me of a schedule change. The train would now arrive in Paris at 10:58 instead of the originally planned 10 a.m. That may not sound like much, but in my case it made a significant difference. My onward connections from Paris would no longer work. As a result, I had to adjust my plans and end my journey in Brussels instead. Then, exactly 24 hours before departure, I received another email from European Sleeper. At that point, everything still seemed to be in order. However, just over an hour later, a second email arrived, and this is where things became more complicated. I was informed that my booking had been downgraded. Instead of a private sleeper, I would now be traveling in a shared compartment with a refund of €25 and a 20% discount on a future booking. And what stood out to me was not just the change itself, but the way it was communicated. There was no real explanation beyond a vague reference to a rearrangement of the train, and no option presented to accept or decline the change. It was simply imposed. From there, a long exchange of emails followed. And it's worth noting that all of this was happening while I was already traveling, which in itself was an unwelcome complication to my day. At that stage, cancelling the trip was not really an option for me due to my onward plans from Brussels. So the situation remained uncertain right up until boarding. At that point, it seemed quite possible that this might escalate further, potentially involving the regulator or even a formal claim. But then, once on board, the situation took an unexpected turn. Although this was not the originally booked compartment, I found myself in a private sleeper after all. And following the journey, a mutually acceptable settlement was reached with European Sleeper, and I will not be pursuing the matter further. From what I was able to gather, the issue appears to have been caused by a sleeping car being unavailable, which required the company to rearrange passengers across the train. And while situations like that are, of course, understandable in railway operations, the way they are handled makes all the difference. In this case, the approach taken was, in my view, not ideal, because ultimately a company cannot simply impose changes on passengers without properly engaging with them. That sets the tone for a confrontational situation, and it often leads to exactly that. If a company encounters a problem, it actually needs its passengers as allies in resolving it. and that requires a different approach. For example, instead of simply announcing changes, the situation could have been explained more transparently, making it clear that the carriage was unavailable and that adjustments were necessary. Passengers could then have been offered options. For instance, those willing to travel on a different date could be offered the rebooking with a meaningful incentive. Others might be willing to share a compartment in exchange for compensation that reflects the actual difference in accommodation plus an additional gesture for the inconvenience. Even simple measures such as offering alternative routes, partial refunds, or flexible changes can go a long way. Because, when approached in the right way, passengers are often far more understanding and cooperative than one might expect. In the end, it's not just about solving the operational problem, it's about how that solution is communicated. Because that is what shapes the overall experience. The difference between feeling like you've been managed and feeling like you've been respected. And in the long run, that difference really does matter. After all this, it's time to head back to my compartment. In the absence of a dining car, I settle and enjoy the rather healthy dinner I picked up earlier in Berlin. Outside, the journey continues as the train rolls steadily into the night. Back inside, the compartment is now in night mode. Just above the pillow, there's a small bedside lamp, along with a control for the night lighting. There's also a handy storage pocket within easy reach. As for me, it's time for the usual evening routine, starting with my night ablutions. Then the blinds come down, the door is locked, and it's time to call it a night. Good night! Good morning from somewhere in Belgium. After a good night's sleep, I wake up and, according to Google Maps, we're just outside Liège. As I try to go through my morning routine, the tap doesn't deliver even the tiniest trickle of water. But well, I'll manage. Breakfast soon arrives, brought by the lovely cabin attendant as soon as she notices I'm awake.
Oh, thank you so much, Nancy.
Black,
Black coffee, thank you so much.
Enjoy it.
It's a generous spread, complimentary for passengers traveling in sleeping cars, or in European sleepers terminology, Comfort Plus. For all other passengers, it can be purchased for €14.50. After breakfast, it's time for a short walk through the train and to enjoy the passing scenery from the rear car. Also very important to find a working toilet. I return to my compartment just as we pass the depot at Leuven, where we make a brief stop. Leuven is a historic university city, home to one of the oldest universities in Europe, founded in 1425, and today a lively center of student life and innovation. Soon after, we were on the move again. The first views of the Scherwijk depot tell us that we're already approaching Brussels and that the journey is coming to an end. Shortly after Brussels North, we entered the tunnel beneath the city, the so-called North-South connection. Its construction began in 1914, but due to both World Wars, it was only completed in 1952. Today, with 6 tracks and constant traffic in both directions, it's one of the busiest railway tunnels in the world. And then, at 7:04, 4 minutes ahead of schedule and around 12 hours after leaving Berlin, we arrive at Brussels South, Bruxelles-Midi or Brussels-Midi, the main railway station in the Belgian capital. And with that, it's time for a balance of the journey. European Sleeper's motto is the good night train. So, was this a good night? Yes, undoubtedly. The bed is comfortable, the bedding perfectly adequate, and I was able to get a proper night's sleep. Despite departing Berlin with a delay of 27 minutes, the generous timetable meant we arrived in Brussels slightly ahead of schedule, around 7 a.m., which is a very reasonable arrival time. The same, however, cannot quite be said for Paris, where arrival is closer to 11 a.m., perhaps a little on the late side. On the downside, there were a few issues. The near absence of water in the sleeping car, which by morning became a complete lack of water, is clearly not ideal and something I had already experienced on a previous trip. Several toilets were also out of service throughout the train, including those in the sleeping car. And the absence of a restaurant car is noticeable, especially on a journey that spans both dinner and breakfast. However, there is one aspect that, for me, outweighs all the others. Because whether by train, plane or ship, what truly makes or breaks a journey is the crew. And here, European Sleeper absolutely delivers. The car attendant was attentive, friendly, engaging, and genuinely helpful throughout the journey. The train manager, too, was always present, approachable, and clearly on top of the operation. And that is precisely why I would not hesitate to travel with European Sleeper again. Do the booking complications and the events leading up to this journey deter me? No. I choose to see this as a one-off, and I hope that, in the future, situations like this will be handled with greater care and transparency. Because what European Sleeper is trying to do is quite simply commendable. Affordable night trains connecting major European cities while taking on the full commercial risk. And from where I stand, that is something worth supporting. Thanks for riding with me on today's journey all the way to the end. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, share and drop a comment below. It really helps the channel grow and keeps these rail adventures rolling, always with a bit of history and technology. Thanks for coming along, and I'll see you next week.